So welcome back to everyone here in the room and to everyone participating through the webcast. For anybody who's joining us for this afternoon's session, I am Tiffany Hayden, your Council President, and I'd like to introduce you to the members of the Professional Standards Working Group who are up on stage with me. I have Isabel Malo, Jennifer Lemon, Lily Martin, and Wendy Marco. So let me give you a bit of background on the professional standards work that has been done so far. So first off, how did we get here? Well, when midwifery became legislated and regulated in Ontario, there were a few documents that provided guidance to Ontario midwifery practices, and it became the college's responsibility to put these documents into place. Documents like standards of practice were developed not only to guide midwifery practice, but also to demonstrate to the public and other healthcare providers what midwives were authorized to do. Using this approach, the college has developed standards for a variety of different reasons, including to provide guidance regarding specific clinical steps, in response to the introduction of new technology or an expanded scope of practice for a small group of midwives, and in response to specific complaints or trends in complaints. The result has been that some standards offer guidance in practice areas where the college has limited expertise, and some standards reiterate information already provided in regulation. So now that midwifery is an integrated part of the healthcare system in Ontario, and there are numerous guidelines, community standards, peer-reviewed journals, and databases that house rigorous evidence-based research about best practices. These sources are in addition to those being developed and supported by the organizations such as Association of Ontario Midwives, the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada, and the Canadian Pediatric Society. So why consider a new approach to standards development? The college is committed to delivering a modern, evidence-based, informed approach to regulation. It is based on principles of good regulation that focuses on our core purpose of protecting the public. Targeted, proportionate regulation is key to that. We often hear from you, those of you who contact the college, that our standards can be rigid, complex, and quite difficult to interpret. That is why the college is reviewing and refining our approach to regulation, including simplifying our standards of practice. So for context, the college has 32 standards of practice, where other health colleges and international midwifery organizations have between 5 to 10. None of the other colleges have standards providing the same level of clinical and detailed administrative detail as college standards. And now that times have changed, we do not need to have so many detailed clinical standards. So this brings me to, what is a principles-based approach? Principles-based regulation means moving away from reliance on these detailed prescriptive rules and relying more on high-level, broadly stated rules or principles to set the standards by which regulated entities, like midwives, must practice. Midwives are expected to observe these fundamental rules and practice with the autonomy to decide how to follow them. This approach gives midwives the flexibility to decide which policies and procedures they should adopt in order to achieve compliance with the principles. What are the benefits of a principles-based approach? We believe that a principles-based approach will benefit clients, midwives, midwifery practices, and the college in numerous ways. So I'm going to provide you with 2 examples, as many other examples will be presented to you by the working group. So how will a principles-based approach benefit clients? Clients will be able to better understand what to expect from midwifery care and the choices available to them. And for the college college will be able to respond to new issues as they arise more effectively without having to continually revise the existing rules. So now I would like to invite the working group to present on the 5 principles and lead us through a discussion about each one.
Can you, oh yeah, you can hear me. Hello everyone, I'm Isabella Milo. I'm one of the professional member that worked on the new standards as they stand now. So on your table, all of you received a package that lists the document as it stands today. You will notice that all of the principles are color-coded. So as we move through them, we'll refer you to each one based on their color. So we'll give you a point of reference to make this a little easier to follow along. So as you've read through the document, you have seen that now all the standards live under 5 main principles, as Tiffany mentioned. And those principles are meant to be high-level ideas about what it's like to be a midwife and the life of a midwife. So they're basically defined the fundamental ethical and professional expectations that we all hold. So they speak to our clinical skills, they speak to our relationships with our clients, they speak to our relationships with our peers, whether they be fellow midwives or other care providers. They speak about our professionalism and integrity, and they also refer to our relationship with the healthcare system as a whole and where we fit in it. So what we'd like to do now is we're all going to take turns speaking a little bit more in details to each of the principles. And once that's completed, I think Victoria is going to walk us through the next step, which will be group discussion and Q&A, questions and answered. So the first principle, let's see, how does this work, this one here? So this here lists the 5 principles that we're going to be speaking to, and the first one we're going to talk about is professional knowledge and practice, which is the yellow sheet in your package, this one right here. So this particular principles holds all the standards that refer to our clinical practice. So they speak to our core competencies as well as our advanced competencies. They speak to the scope of practice and the authorized acts that midwives are allowed to do. They refer to documentation and what's expected in that regard. They also give guidance to midwives who are dual registrants. So if a midwife was registered with more than one college, so for example, if you're a midwife and a nurse practitioner or a midwife and a massage therapist, what are the expectations around that? They also have a quality control aspect where there's the expectations of each midwife maintaining and continuing improving his or her skills. And if you are a midwife with practice management responsibility, this is new actually with the standards. There's a component that now addresses those issues. So in this particular principle, if you are one of those midwives that have management responsibilities, there's the expectations that you will have create systems so that your colleagues can practice safely and competently. So whether it addresses things like operational budget allocation or creating systems where each midwife is able to continue doing continuing education or our certification. So it's about creating an environment that will promote that. So this portion is different than the standards that you're all are used to, and you'll see them in each of the different 5 principles that are coming up. So I'll pass the microphone to Wendy, and we'll move on to the second principle.
So, thank you everyone for coming. I just want to say this is great to see so many of you here, and it speaks to the engagement in our profession. So this principle, we're used to seeing client-centered care, and when person first came up, I was like, person? We're not looking after persons, we're looking after clients. But the reason that terminology is being used is because it's really looking at the person as a whole and their life context, and recognizing that everybody is an individual, and those factors in their life affects the kind of care that they're going to get from each of us. and that we have to respond to those needs in an individual way with the persons that are in care. So I'm just going to highlight, I won't read through all the things on your pink sheet, and for those that are on the webinar, it's the pink sheet from Principle 2. But there's a few things that are different in these new standards. One is that every birth can be attended with a midwife, and either a second midwife or someone else who is competent to perform the role of a second midwife. And the reason that standard is being changed is because, and I didn't realize this till we were working on this as a group, that almost 40% of midwives, or practices, sorry, not midwives, but almost 40% of practices use second attendants in Ontario. So that means almost half of our profession can't meet the current standards. So they need to change. So we're going to work on looking at what those competencies will look like and defining them, but that is already something that is happening. The other change is that ensuring clients have 24-hour access to midwifery care throughout their whole pregnancy, and if that's not available, that they have a suitable alternative. And the reason that standard is in there is in some places there are midwives that practice with non-midwives, so they might sign off care to a physician group. And so that should be made clear who is following up. The other thing that's a little bit different in these standards is taking reasonable steps to provide care in the early postpartum in the setting chosen by the client. So you'll see the language leaves it a little bit open, because that could be home, could be in the hospital, could be at the client's aunt's house, but if it's reasonable to do so. Then, as Isabel had alluded to, there's also a standard that is new about practice management midwives. So if you manage a practice, we also have included a standard in here that there's a fair intake process for taking on clients, that we're not cherry picking all the multips in your community or something, that there should be some manner in which midwives, when they're doing intake, that they can explain that is fair. And that that the practice itself is managed in a way that isn't to the detriment of clients in care. So you wouldn't have, for example, all the midwives on holidays all at the same time. And then the next one is leadership and collaboration. So in this is the blue sheet if you have your package. And again, I'll just go over the things that are new in this. So the definition of continuity: providing continuity of care by developing and maintaining an ongoing relationship of trust with your clients, and establish and work within systems that are clear to clients when care is shared between a team of midwives, by providing complete and accurate client information to the other midwives at the time care is handed over to them, making every effort to ensure that a care provider known to a client is available to attend the birth. So you'll notice that the limit of 4 midwives is gone out of the way this is worded. And again, it's difficult to enforce that limit of 4. You might still strive for that, because we know that limiting the number of people meet in their care is beneficial if there's a close relationship, but sometimes for various reasons, and I think all of you can think of examples, that might not be realistic, and we'll touch on that when Jennifer speaks. But
thank you. Hi, I'm just going to take a second to introduce myself. I think a lot of you know each other professionally in this room. I'm actually a member of the public, and I was appointed to the Council at the College of Midwives. My name's Jennifer Lemon, and for the past 2 years, I've also been serving as the public vice president. When I was thinking about presenting to all of you today and how I could engage in a room of professionals when I'm not one of you, I was reminded of this TV ad from a few years back for hair transplants for men. And I don't know if any of you remember it, But this man holds up photo after photo of dramatic transformations from bald head to full head of hair. And at the end of the TV ad, he holds up his own photo and says, "I'm not just your president, I'm also a client." I'm hoping my hair looks a little more natural than his did, but I'm here today also not just as your vice president, but as a client of midwifery in Ontario. I've had 3 babies with 3 different practices in Ontario, including our 3rd baby, who turned 4 just recently, and she was the only baby cooperative enough to go along with my plans for a home birth. This is what first brought me to the college, and it's what keeps me working in the public interest with all of you. And back to my real assignment, that's this slide here on integrity. It's the purple sheet in your folder, and for those of you on the webcast, it is principle number 4. I feel like I'm really loud. Move back. Okay, so integrity, what does this even mean? The summary in our definition hits on a few key points: being truthful and honest, acting in the best interests of your clients, consistently doing what is right, and upholding the values of the profession. The word itself comes from the Latin integer, which is to be whole and complete. So to me, integrity means bringing together this truthfulness and honesty in all aspects of oneself, both at work and elsewhere. It means having a wholeness of character that's consistent in your actions, your values, and your principles. As a professional midwife, you must do the right thing all of the time. Drawing you back to the purple handout, I just want to highlight a few changes and a few things that are the same. Some standards you'll recognize are essentially or exactly the same: not abandoning clients in labor in Standard 40, that was taken directly from the Code of Ethics. In Standards 48 and 49, setting clear boundaries, including not engaging in sexual conduct with clients. Standard 43 has now been enhanced, and that will hopefully help you better deal with a conflict of interest should it arise. And because having integrity means that when you act in a way that is out of integrity, you stop, acknowledge it, apologize, and correct course, Standard 42 now says that you must disclose any harm sustained by clients while in your care. And Standard 51 addresses that you must adjust your practice if fatigue, illness, or stress are preventing you from bringing integrity to your work. To be a leader with integrity, you must have a focus on the development of character, your own for sure, but also as a practice partner, you must have a focus and manage your practice in a way that supports the well-being of everyone involved in client care in your practice. This came largely from our first public consultation. And as well, in Standard 55, the information you provide publicly must be accurate and verifiable. You as midwives are part of a very special profession. You leave a lasting impression on your clients. And when I hear women out there, and I talk often with women who have had midwives for their births, I rarely hear anything but praise. You may think that this is because of the model of care under which you've operated, or because of the relatively small size of your profession. But upon reflection and being involved in this working group, I actually think it's because of the integrity that you bring to your work. I loved my experiences with all of my midwives, but I am also a client who never had a primary midwife show up at any of my 3 births, for various and appropriate reasons. But those who did show up, one very special one who's in this room today, had integrity. They showed up, they were honest and truthful. They had actions, values, and principles that were consistent with the profession. And they earned my trust and became as much a part of my personal midwifery lore as anyone who cared for me for the months before or the weeks after my births. This 4th principle really defines the type of people you have in your profession. When you act with integrity, you continue to uphold the excellent reputation of your profession. You continue to have the public's trust and confidence, and ultimately, you contribute to the growth and continuation of midwifery, and because we're looked to by other jurisdictions beyond Ontario as well. And with that, I will have some integrity, do the right thing, and pass the microphone over to Lily for the next section.
Thanks, Jennifer. All right, so we are on to the final principle, Principle 5. It's the green sheet, and it is commitment to self-regulation. This is one of my favorite principles, because I think it reflects, it's fairly simple and yet kind of complex. I would say that it is two things. It reflects an attitude, or as we've been hearing this morning, perhaps that sense of professional identity. But it also reflects or contains a set of very specific behaviors. I'll start with the behaviors first because they're very simple and clear, I think, and they kind of boil down to a commitment to cooperate and communicate with the college that regulates you. So it's as simple as ensuring you notify the college of your new address within 14 days of moving, returning important emails on time, just really staying in touch and responsible for communication, to more complex things such as cooperating with college investigations should they be happening. It's also appropriately supervising students or peers to whom you have a duty to supervise, and in another crucial piece, ensuring that clients are aware of the college's role and know how to file a complaint if they want to. The attitude, I think, it's reflected a little bit in the first sentence of the principle, which says self-regulation is a privilege, that it recognizes the maturity of the profession and honors the knowledge and skills possessed by its members. I really like this sentence because I think it reflects what we were hearing this morning about the social contract between society and us as professionals, in that we are reminded it's a privilege and a responsibility, but it's also speaks to honoring our knowledge and skills and providing us with respect for how hard we work to do the right things as often as we can. Do our best, really, is what it boils down to. I think it also is about professional self-reflection, and I would like to add participating in self-regulation either by running for council or voting or both. And I would say also, please congratulate yourselves on being here today, to listen, to consider, and to provide feedback either here in person or all the other ways online. Every single voice is important because we are a self-regulated profession and we are creating these standards for ourselves. So please provide your feedback. Okay. So that's the principles summarized. Now, the next slide is helpful. It just shows the context in which these standards exist. And if you're wondering why some requirements of midwives aren't included in the professional standards, it's because they can be found elsewhere, in legislation, regulation, or other requirements, like the registration requirement, for example. So as you can see in the slide, the overarching documents that, define and just show what we do are legislation, so law, regulation, which is also a form of law. That's the RHPA, the Midwifery Act, that defines our scope, defines the authorized acts. There's the regulations, many of which are required, so the general regulation, the professional misconduct regulation, registration. And those are things that we can request to change, but ultimately the government has the authority to change them only. Below that, you'll see all the requirements and documents that are sort of housed here at the college that as a council we can change given if we follow a certain process, which includes public consultation, which is what we're doing right now. That's a part of it. And you can see that the college standards and guidelines are just one part of that. So this is not, there are lots of other places where we can look to see what it is we can do and how we should do it. And then you'll see off to the side, community standards, guidelines, and policies. And this is the place where clinical practice guidelines that are created either by the AOM, by the SOGC, by other bodies, hospital policies, and what we all know as community standards, which may be written or may not be written, that's where those things exist, and they change all the time, especially as evidence-based care becomes more and more, is what we're seeing more and more. So that just sort of shows the hierarchy of the documents. And next, what will we achieve? I like to think of it as we're going to achieve evidence-based regulation. Really, we feel that it's going to benefit, obviously, the public and members as well. And if we benefit members, they're going to provide better and safer care, which is how it helps to benefit the public. It places greater trust in professional judgment, gives midwives flexibility to organize their practice in a way that better suits them and suits the communities that they're serving. And we want to make it much clearer to clients what they can expect from midwifery care. It's also important to remember this is just the minimum standards that we want that all midwives must meet. It doesn't define everything that you could do. You know, in terms of continuity of care, you could have only 2 midwives meet a client, or you might have more. But we wanted to make the standards achievable for all members. And the other thing is just to say that we want to establish consistent rules that won't need to be changed all the time as the evidence changes.
Okay, so this document has already been out for a public consultation. It was circulated this summer in July, and we did extend the deadline based on member feedback, so it closed on September 1st. We heard feedback in a few different ways. We heard back from a survey, from comments left on the website, and from letters and emails that were sent directly to the college, including one from the AOM. We had over 30 responses to the survey, which represents about 3 to 4% of your membership, and 10 emails or letters. It might sound like a low response rate, but we've actually, and we have actually engaged in a second round of public consultation, which is ongoing now, closing December 21st. To try to get our numbers up. But this response rate is in line with response rates from other health regulatory colleges and other similar government consultations. And in fact, this past year, the CPSO consulted on, among other things, assisted dying and had, proportionately to their membership, a much smaller response rate. I am a client, as I've said, and I care about the same things that most of you care deeply about continuity of care, informed choice, choice of birthplace. And I want these things to live on in this document in a way that is based in empirical evidence and that will contribute to safe, effective, and flexible midwifery care going forward and in a changing context. Appendix E specifically addresses how these aspects of care have been captured in the new standards. But as a self-regulated profession, this isn't as much about me as it is about you and how your college will regulate you in the public interest. You're all encouraged to give your own feedback, as I know some of my colleagues have already said. Feedback, share concerns, compliments, encourage your clients to get involved as well on the website by writing directly to the college, or you actually have a handy feedback form included in your package today if you wish to drop off some comments on your way out. Okay, so what have we heard so far at this point in the consultation process? We've heard that you agree with our approach to streamlining standards that supports flexibility and innovation in your practice. And we've heard strong support, particularly from our regulators, for the focus we've put on clients and the broader public interest. The feedback we've received has been generally positive. Some respondents have expressed concerns about the lack of perceived lack of prescriptive rules and whether midwives will have the knowledge, skill, and judgment to practice without them. And some feedback asked for clearer expectations and more detail. Some respondents, including the AOM, have been firmly opposed to the way the model of care has been integrated into the new standards, and we've addressed that again in Appendix E. Some wondered if this could result in poor clinical outcomes, medically unnecessary transfers of care, and disruptions to continuity. A few, including the AOM, were opposed to rescinding particular standards that they felt were useful advocacy tools for the profession. And these included VBAC and the choice of birthplace, and when a client chooses care outside the midwifery standards of practice. And finally, there were requests to help practices understand the expectations of these new standards so that they can achieve the right outcomes for their clients. In Appendix C of your package, you'll notice that there's a timeline of the creation and implementation of this document. I want this to give you confidence that every single piece of feedback that you have given to the college, whether through the website or through a letter or what we gather here today, has been fully considered by the college and discussed by this professional working group as well as council at the college. We read and discuss all comments submitted. And we'll do that again at the end of the second round of public consultation. In response to your feedback so far, the college has also drafted an official response to consultation document, and that's included in your package today, and it's also been distributed to you electronically. I hope that this addresses the issues that have been brought forward, but if not, or if you still have questions or concerns, you have time to engage in the second round of public consultation between now and December 21st. I'll let Isabel fill you in on the rest of the next steps in our process.
So this next slide speaks to the timeline that we're looking at for the implementation of these new standards. So as you know, we're deep in the consultation period, and as Jennifer mentioned, the consultation time will end December 21st. Once that's completed, the revised document will be brought to Council in March for approval. And if approved, the new standards or the new document will be implemented in June of 2018. It doesn't mean that life as we know it is going to change. In fact, we expect really nothing to change except maybe creating a little bit of flexibility for all of us to adapt to our changing environment or the circumstances in which we work. So we will address some of that as we go through the question period. But again, there was a mention, some fear around. Okay, now what? It seems like a drastic change, but really, a lot of the standards that we know and have been working with still exist. They just worded a little differently and put into different places that we're used to, but they don't necessarily change drastically how we expect each of us to work. So are we moving to the question period? Does Victoria want to? Okay, so I'll let Victoria explain the next steps. Kind of good segue to move into the description of what happens next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Marshall. I'm the new Communications and Events Coordinator at the college, so it's nice to get to meet so many people today. So I think, Jennifer, you've largely covered the slide here. Basically, it's just to say that today is part of the consultation process. It is not the full consultation. And so while we're taking very seriously everything that's said here today, we also invite folks to give feedback in other ways. So that's online on our website by leaving a comment, writing an email, writing one either individually or as a practice. And then we provided a feedback form for today. And we're also going to be collecting everything that's written on the feedback forms that we use as part of the breakout sessions here for the consultation. So, Great. So we are asking people to get together to do a breakout session for the consultation today. We felt it was probably the best way to hear from a diversity of voices and to make sure everyone has an opportunity to let us know what they think. We're going to ask you to form tables of maybe 8 to 10. I think probably 6 tables would be ideal. And then we're going to give everyone 20 minutes to discuss the first 3 principles together. So that's your yellow sheet, Principle 1, Professional Knowledge and Practice. Pink sheet, Person-Centered Care. And Leadership and Collaboration is on the blue, and that's Principle number 3. For those on the webcast, Principles 1, 2, and 3 from the standards document that you should have the link for. So after we get back from the 20 minutes of discussion, we're going to ask each table to have one person stand up and share with the group a benefit they see from this principle, a concern, and an outstanding question that they have. And we're going to go table by table, going through that, as well as giving some opportunity to the folks on the webcast to give their feedback there as well. We're going to ask each table, if possible, to keep this response that they give here just in that moment to 2 minutes, just so we can actually hear from everybody. But like I said, we are going to be collecting the full paper, so anybody who has more written down will get that and we'll gather that as well. And we're going to also ask that as you stand up to share your perspective, if something's been said already and you have something different written down, try not to repeat things if you can. If you want to for emphasis, that's okay, but we're hoping to hear, like I said, as much as we can. And then once everyone's had a chance to go around, the working group will respond to each principle. So Principle 1, 2, 3, that way. And then again, for the folks on the webcast, you can participate using the chat. Same thing, share your benefits, concerns, questions you have about each principle, or you can use this time to leave a comment on the website that we'll post later and that we hope will continue to further discussion. So if everyone doesn't mind moving into tables together, we'll give you 20 minutes, and so we'll come back at 2:15, if that works for everyone. Thanks. Yeah, so yeah.
Oh,
Well, they're all standing up,
okay.
right? That's
There are 8 tables, so
no, they won't be. Yeah.
No, it just means 2 tables are moving in.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. And we ended up with about half an hour there, so I know that there's a lot to talk about. I think we're going to get back together now, and so what we're going to do is have Zara go around to each table and ask one person from each table to stand up, say a benefit, a concern, and a question about Principle 1, professional knowledge and practice. So that's, again, the yellow sheets here. We're going to ask everyone to keep their comments to 2 minutes so that we can hear from everybody. And in order to do that, once you've got about 15 seconds left, I'm just going to raise a hand, and then hopefully if you can kind of wrap up the question there, but be pretty reasonable about it. So table 1, is this table 1 here? Are you table 1? Great. So can we start? Oh, okay. Should we go to table 5? Would that be helpful? We'll come back to you. Everyone got mixed up. Well, just come right here. There we go. Look under your chairs.
Hello. Hello, hello. Yep, there we go. Okay.
Oh, wait, sorry,
So,
and just if sorry, I hate to interrupt you, but if you don't mind just introducing yourself and
Yes.
saying where you practice, that
Okay.
would just be interesting for me personally, and I'm sure some other people in the room.
My name is Sabina Feller, and I practice in Toronto with Riverdale Community Midwives. So our table came up with the following. Benefits on the yellow sheet, professional knowledge and practice. Number one of the comments was, this creates a culture that benefits midwives' autonomy and allows them to be more responsive to shifting environments. So people liked that. And then the other point there was a comment on in terms of benefits was number 14. And what was said, there was a huge improvement. 14 is the one about develop and maintain quality improvement systems to support the professional performance of midwives and to enhance the quality of client care. So that there's more responsibility now on the practices. That was all for benefits. That there was a lot of discussion, but frankly, I think there wasn't a lot of succinct comments that people agreed on. Sorry, it's just the way it was. Concerns, number 2. So number 2, there was a concern. Quote, people would like to change this to work in accord with the Midwifery Act instead of within the boundaries of the Midwifery Act. See the difference? It's has more of a flow to it, let's say. And then one person said, what does it mean? So we talked about that. But I think one person in our group explained it, that there is other standards, the Canadian ones versus the Ontario ones, and so on and so forth. Page number 2.
Oh, sorry, it's been just over 2 minutes, so if you
Yes.
if you have a question
Yeah,
as well, that
okay.
would be great.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you. And we only have one question. Competencies, should it be accompanied by core competencies so that people are aware of it? Like to make people aware of them, the Canadian ones. And why? Oh, one big question. That was yours, Vicky, sorry. Page 2. Why? It starts with why. That's what's a question. Why are we keeping documentation so prescriptive? Everything else is now loosey-goosey and boiled down. But the documentation part is very prescriptive. And there was explanation, you know, it probably has to do with legal things and so on and so forth, but it was just a question we raised. That's all. Not necessarily a criticism, though.
Great. And so, thank you very much. For the next table, if you could give one benefit, one concern, and one question, ideally one that wasn't mentioned by the first table, but if you'd like to echo something, then that's your prerogative. Yeah.
Hi. Hi. So principal.
Oh, and just your name and where you practice, if you don't mind.
Oh,
for me.
Naomi Brooks, and I'm practicing everywhere.
Great.
So principle 1. So the benefits was that we thought that it really enforces re-engagement, and that presumes that we know how to do our jobs. And the concerns were losing the prescriptive nature could actually have either negative or positive benefits. And we had a couple of questions. What steps into the breach left by the removal of the advocacy tools, quote unquote, that the previous standards gave us? And when the second question is, when a complaint is lodged against a midwife, by what criteria will they be judged? How will that be measured?
Great. Thank you very much. The next table, start with name and where you practice, if you don't mind.
Hi, my name is Usha Ramstar, and I practice at Family Care Midwives in Vaughan. So regarding Principle 1, we actually had a long discussion about these principles, and in terms of within the context of informed choice. So it says, you know, you have to do things that are evidence-based, but what if someone wants something that's not evidence-based? So we talked a lot about adding informed choice to the statement that talks about things have to be evidence-based, but then we felt that it actually probably needed to be added to the paragraph on the top, because it applies to everything. You know, you have to do this within the context of informed choice, needs to be put in the top section somehow of Principle 1. So for Principle number 2, person-centered care.
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh,
Yep, just Principle 1 for now.
Great, perfect.
Thanks.
I think that was it. Yeah, that was
That was your
really our
discussion
whole
there?
discussion on Principle 1, was that informed choice needed to be included, and we're in Principle 1, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yellow.
That informed choice needed to be included, and where was the best place in the subheading.
Thank you so much. Move to the next table, and again, just start with a name and where you practice, please.
I'm Jenna Robertson. I practice at Midwifery Care of Peel and Halton Hills in Mississauga. So the benefits, the generalized nature of the principles really reflecting the maturity of the profession at this stage of being regulated for more than 20 years. So we really appreciated that. We had a concern around the line, what number was it? There's a line about advanced core competencies and then advanced competencies. Just the word advanced sort of, there's an implicit hierarchy there that we had some questions about, and maybe think that should be examined. And then questions around what is being referred to in terms of core competencies. So what's being referenced there? Where's the list of core competencies, and who's determining core versus advanced, with a better word hopefully than advanced? Because there are some things like ECV that not all midwives do. Is that's something we all learn in the MEP, but is it considered core, or is it advanced? Like, where is that being determined, and how?
Great, thank you. And then is table one, loud all of a sudden. Are you ready to give some response?
Be entirely ready.
Okay.
I'm Jasmine Texan. I practice at Saskatchewan Rouge Valley Midwives, but really, I mean, this information is like these comments are coming from from a number of practices from downtown Toronto. I'm in the east end of the GTA. So for Principle 1, our group, sorry? Not as far east as me. So for Principle 1, the benefit that we discussed was that the onus is placed on midwives to take responsibility for what good clinical practice is, particularly, for example, in settings such as remote practices where those particular skills and knowledge might be a little bit more different. We didn't have any concerns. However, we did have a few questions. In particular, we had a lot of discussion around the word good being used right front and center in that principle. We wondered how good is being defined regarding clinical and professional judgment. We felt that in settings where there is a lot of variability in practice, that could create a lot of gray areas, different settings and contexts. So we wondered, for example, like how are midwives supposed to know what good is? We're wondering, how is the CMO supposed to know what good is? If there was a definition that was being referenced. Regarding guideline number 8, we are wondering if it would be possible to change the word provide to offer, to do that substitution in order to be consistent with our informed choice values. And regarding guideline number 9, we had a lot of discussion around the use of the word only, because we wondered, what the rationale was behind that. Like, was the word only really necessary? Was there a particular situation that the CMO was trying to prevent with that specific usage, and if that word could be removed?
Great, super. And then I think, do we have a couple questions from the folks on the webcast? Oh, okay, terrific. So that's great. I'll throw it over to the panel to respond to that.
All right, thank you everyone for this. I'm so happy to hear that the overall benefit were similar to what we felt, the benefit as well, which is a recognition that we know what we're doing, and there's a maturity to the profession, and that we all, have the expertise to be good care providers. So I think you've all understood that from this first principle, and I'm glad to hear that feedback. When it comes to the actual wording, when there's like a word here or there that you would see a benefit in changing, I think that would be a good place to actually send that as an email, because if we start going down to the nitty-gritty of each word, it's going to be a really long discussion. So these are really good feedback for us to receive by email and integrate into a longer discussion. So what else do we have? So there was a question, so I'll just move through my notes. There was a question about competencies and what's considered a core competency versus an advanced competencies. So you'll notice in your document that there are words that are highlighted, and these words are going to be tied to a glossary. So what that means is once you read the document, if you clicked on that particular word, there'll be a definition of it. So you will know exactly what we mean when we speak to each one. The core competency list is the Canadian core competency list, and that's something that we need to, that we currently work under, that needs to stay. Anything that's outside of that would be considered advanced. So whether it's a first assist or anything that would require additional training would be considered an advanced competency. The question about documentation, we had a long discussion about that, and it's a really good one. Why are we putting so much emphasis on documentation when the rest is just has more space for adaptation? And there was I think there was legal counsel that was consulted on that. And one could argue that we could remove that section and just refer to documents that already exist. We chose to keep it in part, I think, to reflect some advice that we received, as well as to also emphasize the incredible importance of documentation, because as a regulator, we know that documentation can make or break a situation in the end. So I think the weight of it is reflected in the standard, but I agree there was a lot of discussion as to whether or not this was important. So we'll reflect on that still. I think that would be another important point to discuss as a group. About the advocacy tool, and I'm not sure if there is, because I know that came through feedback as well, reference to using some of the standards as tools to negotiate how we practice. And I think we just need to remind ourselves that it's not the role of a standard to be used that way. Really, the standards is about us, it's about our profession, and it sets the minimum expectations that all of us need to work under. However, we are aware that there are times where we need to have, or feel we need to have, kind of the backing of some documents to be able to articulate our position when we're working with other care providers. And the college has every intention of creating position statements on some of those more contentious issues, like VBACs at home, for example. So these will be addressed, but differently. So there won't necessarily be a standard, because that's not where it should live, but there will be position statements that will help support the work that midwives do, because there are still things that are, a bit controversial. Let's see. As far as complaints go, there was another question that came out. The complaint system doesn't change with the change that are occurring here. Midwives will always be judged by a group of their peers, and that will always remain. And the standards that are used are the evidence that's used is the same whether the standards are a little bit more open or if they were very prescriptive. The fact of the matter is, if there is a complaint, the steps will be, would your peers agree that decision-making that you underwent is reasonable and justifiable? And so the standard sets the minimum expectations. There are other evidence that come, but in the end, it will be a group of midwives that would decide whether or not this was a reasonable approach to care. So as far as what documents are used, there's a variety of process, and I'm not on the discipline committee, so I'm not the expert on this, but in the end, we are self-regulated, which means that we set the rules and we all judge by each other when there is a problem. As far as informed choice, so informed choice, of course, is a big part of this, and we included it in the second standard, person-centered care. So we can make a note about whether or not it fits into our clinical practice, because you're right, it does kind of blend in, but it was integrated into the second principle, person-centered care. That's where it kind of lives. And again, it sets because it is there, it's not because it's in one section that it doesn't apply to everything we do. Informed choice will be part of every discussions we have in our relationship with our clients, regardless of where that standard is found. But we'll make a note of the fact that it could maybe also be included into the first principle. What else do I list? Core competencies. Okay, I think that's the main pieces, eh? Am I missing anything? Okay, great, thank you.
Add maybe to the advocacy tool, adding to the advocacy tool part of that, I think that our speakers this morning positioned us well to consider which of our stakeholders in the midwifery profession are best positioned to create those advocacy tools. And, your profession, and I'm the public and on the outside of that, but your profession has been around for 20 years, and using those tools as your strongest sense of advocacy might not position you in the best way as a profession anyway. So there are other ways to gain that sense of confidence in your scope and to exert your authority to carry out your practice to the full scope of your practice, and then just to consider where some of that advocacy for that might be better suited to come from rather than from your college.
So I think we're ready to move on now to Principle 2, and so that's person-centered care. Maybe we'll go through the tables in a different order so that folks get to have a new turn at being first.
Okay, me again. So for principle number 2, person-centered care, our group found as a benefit the wording. We particularly liked that it was inclusive. We also liked item 20.6. Our group felt that that was a valuable new inclusion. That was the one around respecting the degree to which clients wanted to be involved in decisions. So we had some discussion about our concern with the phrase adversely affecting client care, how that popped up in a few places. We felt that that could be very subjective, and that was a vulnerability for us. And we also similarly had concerns around the phrase, particularly in item or line 25, not to the detriment of your clients. That phrasing we thought might again be a bit broad, and also that the phrasing was rather negative as opposed to a positive. The 2 questions that we had were related to guideline 24. We thought that that seemed more prescriptive in a document that otherwise is trying not to be prescriptive. We wondered, is this about the timing of postpartum visits, for example, like related to the CCHD, or about the setting that the clients are choosing? So we felt that it was an odd contrast compared to how we approach the timing and location of our prenatal care visits. Our other question was related to guideline 25, and we thought that the wording was problematic there. We wondered, if it was intended to encourage better acknowledgement of bias within our ICDs. We just weren't sure where that was coming from.
Okay, thank you.
Can I take the
Feedback from the live stream? Yeah, thank you.
So there were 2 webcast questions related to Principle 2. One actually is a comment, another question. The first is a comment with respect to 20.1, specifying the need to provide information about midwifery scope of practice, community standards, and available evidence is so much richer than saying clients feel fully informed. Doctors believe their patients feel fully informed, but when they come to us afterwards, they report not being told the details they get from us. I think the richness of some of the current standards is valuable. So, just a comment. And then this is more of a question, 20.4. The standard on when a client chooses care outside of the standards of practice makes it clear that midwives will not abandon clients who choose outside our standards if they cannot access other care beyond not just abandoning them in labor. Does support their right to accept or refuse treatment provide as strong a requirement to support choice? This is one of the fundamentals that brought midwifery as a regulated profession into Ontario, protecting the public by not abandoning people and providing them with integrated care that may fall outside of community standards.
Great, thank you.
Hi again. So the benefits we saw was that it opens up the model of care to different ways of working. And our concerns was that it was stepping away from the existing model, which we know has provided exceptional care. A little bit of a debate there. And had one other point was, in terms of a concern, is the need for a really good historical document that explains the history and process of this document, how we got to here from where we were. Oh, then we have a few questions.
Great.
How can we continue to challenge ourselves to continue to provide excellent care in this context? And how will cultural competency be reflected in the diversity of experience? We thought actually 20.6 was a real red flag. Considering what lenses other than protection of the public has been used to look at this, in terms of equity and anti-oppression. This just hasn't been articulated. So we're not saying it hasn't been used, but we're we have questions about it. And we thought like 20.6 is really culturally specific, and it doesn't, yeah, it's just very culturally specific.
Great, thank you for that.
Hi. So we had a concern about statements 22 and 23. There was a comment that at our table we felt like it did not, that it was inadequate in terms of replacing our current choice of birthplace standard. For number 27, we weren't sure what the based on need. So it's saying develop a process that you determine the need for midwifery care, and there's no guidelines. So it can be defined in any way. So, and where's the accountability from the college on that statement? So what are we being asked to do by saying, you know, obviously we're already selecting our clients in a certain way. So if we couldn't figure out the value of that statement and where the accountability would be requested for that statement, and felt that it was probably unnecessary and a bit confusing. We were also very concerned about item number 28, manage your practice in a way that's not to the detriment of the clients. We didn't like the language either. That's what we had for
Thank you.
number 2. No, those were the things that were jotted down.
Perfect.
Hi, Shireen Furnell from Markham Stouffville Midwives. In terms of benefits, point 25 around bias. Somebody had said there was previous guidance about having to name your bias, whereas this one, no longer requires that. So we thought that was positive, but there is still, there's a few problems around identifying bias and some of the language. I know you didn't want us to go through language, but our main concerns were around language. So point 21, 16, 25, 27, like the word ensure. We had a good discussion around how we've used the word ensure in this standard and other standards. In some statements, it says take reasonable steps to, or make every effort to. So the language around ensuring, just it is, where is it necessary and where is it not, right? Okay. We did have a question. Which was around point number 24, which was take reasonable steps, which we liked. Take reasonable steps to provide care in the early postpartum in the setting chosen by clients. Somebody brought this up already. It's just, the question is, can you give us some rationale around the expectation and why this statement is as it is? Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Courtney from Kensington. There was a lot of overlap with what the other discussions were, or points made. But one of the benefits was that it looks like all the standards are working towards more inclusive language, which our group appreciated. Some of the concerns, which I think have been highlighted by other groups, are that the standards don't encompass the language around the tenets of midwifery in a way that's really tangible. It was felt like it was possibly diluted and maybe the message was being lost a little bit. And then point 22 specifically said home or hospital. Some of the midwives in our groups do hotel births, birth center births, home birth at homes that are not the clients. So we thought there could be an amendment made to that to be more inclusive. And then we did have a question as well about point 27, which I think the other group discussed, but helping to define what a fair intake process was, and having, what was the point? What that is. fairness is. Like, for example, should we be holding spots for late to care clients? How does that translate?
Great. Over to you. Right. I think that's everybody, so jump right in.
Well, maybe I'll answer the last question first, or just address it, not necessarily answer it, but say words back. Develop a fair intake process. That question around what does that look like? I think that that's up to your group to decide what you think that should look like, but just to give that some attention, and you guys please jump in if I'm getting it wrong, but that it could be saving spots for late to care if that's what you think is needed. I mean, it would involve things like thinking about your process so that it isn't just first come, first served, that there might be ways to, I don't know, to just I think that's up to you to define.
That's a perfect example of the maturity of the profession and the adaptability of the standard. You will decide what makes sense in your community. It's not for the college to say, this is what a fair process is. This is for your clinic to determine. And it may be different for each practice.
And the idea of all these standards is that what you do is defensible to a group of your peers and a member of the public who would sit on any panel that reviewed a complaint that came to us. And so because we're talking about this specific standard, it would be creating some sort of policy or practice within your midwifery group. Well, and that would apply to any standard, but yes, okay. And you may be able to, so that comment that just came was that you may be able to defend that repeat multips need midwives the least. And so that may be, in the context of your community, something that you can defend.
No. Sorry, I think
so
folks on the webcast, if it's, that's me too. Folks on the webcast, if it's not happening on the microphone, then they can't hear it. So we can maybe continue going through, and then maybe we can take maybe 2 responses from the room afterwards if we need to, after you've had a chance to address these questions.
But there are important points, and
Absolutely.
I would encourage you to email them, and so we'll consider them, please, because it's the wording. It means different. Like for us, it's very clear. Maybe it's not. So that would be helpful just to send it to us. Do you want to, Karen?
the question about the just where language, again, might not be clear, the question about home versus hospital births, a simple one to answer. So just to remind everybody that this is the minimum standard that you will be expected to adhere to. It is not the practice. You are welcome to elevate above that. And we know and we recognize that there are many communities where a hospital birth or a hotel birth or a birth center birth is a part of your regular practice. And that's an extra thing that you provide, and that's excellent for your clients in that context. At minimum, we're asking you to provide home and hospital as options to your clients. Anything that you do above and beyond that can be best practice within your community.
Yeah, because not all communities have birth centers, so not all midwives. If we put that word in there, then not all of us could meet that standard because we wouldn't be offering birth center birth.
Does that make sense?
All the standards are a minimum. All of them. That's a definition of the standard itself.
But all the word stuff, as a reminder, please email it in so that we can have it all in front of us and we can think about it all.
And so have you responded to the questions that were asked the first time around, or are there any outstanding? Because we can, I see a couple hands of people who seem to want to dig a little bit deeper, so maybe we can have 2 questions from the floor, just follow up. Does that make sense? Does anyone have an outstanding question from the floor that they want to use the microphone for?
From the MEP at Ryerson, and I see a consistent pattern. One of the things that I think it would be helpful for us to remember is that many of these changes were based on complaints from clients or from the public, and if our goal is to provide protection for the public and safety, that's the tone and probably the lens from which this is coming. One of the things that we have to be careful, though, with the language is that the language itself is not confusing. So to say something like every midwife should at least include home, and hospital in their choice of birth discussion with clients means something different than what you have here on this paper. So the language in every sense needs to not be judgmental or considering that this is very much a feminist profession that looks at power differentials. That's the audience you're speaking to. So you can say exactly the same thing, and I understand because I've worked in different systems and I know what you mean, but you might have disenfranchised many of the people at the table here because of those words. So, and ensure was just one of them.
Yeah, great. Is there anyone else in the room who wants to add one more thing about Principle 2 before we move on to Principle 3? Oh, got one there.
I just want to make a comment about the fair practices piece that was or fair intake practices and its relationship with some of the other restrictions that midwives face in the profession. So in our practice, for example, we honestly don't provide fair and equitable intake to those planning hospital births because of the hospital privileging restrictions and hospital numbers restrictions that we face. So, you know, I think probably in the context of a panel of our peers, we could justify that, but I do think the word fair or equitable sometimes doesn't apply because of larger forces that affect us.
Sorry, can I just speak to that? Because and maybe fair isn't the right word there, because I think really we're getting at that you can explain the process should a complaint come in by a member of the public wondering why you took X over Z in that community. And it may be, because midwives are the only care practitioners that can offer home birth, that you prioritize that, particularly in your community, or birth center births. So if that's part of your intake process, that's good. And as long as you can explain, I think that's what the crux of what we're trying to get at. And like I said, this is all about finessing language so that we get it right. So thank you.
Yeah, my family's a military family. My husband's in the military. We move a lot. I've had 3 kids. I've paid for midwifery care out of pocket in Nova Scotia, and I am constantly moving practices, which is why I have been with several. And I'm that person who planned 3 home births. So I was always late to care. I met midwives sometimes within weeks of giving birth, and they were still amazing experiences. And I was very fortunate that those practices had a policy that took me into care late because I was planning a natural home birth. And I don't want to see that lost, because I think that that's a very important part of midwifery. I couldn't get the care I was hoping to get from anyone but you guys in this room. So I think the idea of creating something that's defensible is actually the object here, that you can defend it within the community context in which you practice and within the other care options that people have in your area as well. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, because I think it's a very important point.
Great. So I think we'll move on now to Principle 3, Leadership and Collaboration, and can maybe start again in a different order to keep things fresh. Great.
Okay, this is with respect to number 30. Why change the wording from foster a relationship of trust to develop and maintain a relationship of trust? These relationships will break down from time to time in both directions. Is there a place in the standards that addresses a breakdown in trust? And then in relation to number 33, what does it mean to coordinate care to another provider when requested, more than send records?
Great. Yes.
We don't have tons because we were running out of time, to be honest. The benefits were strengthened positive behavior in group practices. And the concerns were where we talk about reciprocal trust relationships, that we have no control over the other professionals entering into a reciprocal trust relationship. So kind of like, how do we deal with that? We thought number 30, which is provide continuity of care by developing and maintaining an ongoing relationship of trust with your clients, probably should just move to the person-centered care statement. And we thought it would be good to add a statement regarding partnership with clients, not just trust relationship. And also a wording thing, to change the wording to work towards respect or something like that, rather than reciprocal trust. That it's a process, basically, was what we were trying to get at.
Thank you.
Where'd Sarah go?
Thanks, Naomi.
Okay, so our group for Principle 3, we thought that we discussed benefits particularly around item 31.1. We felt that it was a positive change to make all involved in a client's care responsible for that care, not just the coordinating midwife as in previous versions. We thought that for item 31.4, that encouraged and acknowledged better communication, collaborative care, and acknowledged as well the realities of shared care, which is becoming more common. We were concerned around item 37, and there has been discussion already around just this discomfort about taking out the advocacy piece. So people asked, advocating for clients, with whom and for what, and we were concerned about just the removal but also recognize that perhaps this is, addressed elsewhere and more appropriately. The questions that we had were around item 34. We wondered if this was, the intent behind this was essentially to elaborate in another way the do not abandon care value, or was it meant to address or incorporate ICDCs, or to address situations where clients refuse recommendations. We're really just, again, when reviewing the guidelines in general, we just kept asking ourselves, what's the background, what's the context, or the rationale behind this?
Thank you.
Sabine, are you speaking again?
Many of our comments actually agreed with what's already been said. We found it was a benefit that the term collaboration was being used, and making every effort to ensure there was a known provider in 31.5, in 32, taking reasonable steps. We really appreciated that kind of language. I guess maybe I'm responding to what somebody thought of number 34. I'm just thinking of the undiagnosed triplets that you came to assess, and that you're not going to abandon the client, and you're the best qualified or equipped provider to be able to attend to birth while you're waiting for someone for whom that scope is much more comfortable to work. So when that comment came of why would you ever consider giving care when it exceeds your knowledge and skills, when you're the best trained provider. So I understood that. I know it might not be clear for everyone because they've never been there, but I have.
Thank you very much.
Hi, so for Principle 3, for benefits, we liked taking out the 4 midwife standard. So we, in terms of 31.5, we actually were not sure what making every effort means. And there's also taking reasonable steps. So what does that mean? And how does that actually play out in, like, does it mean making every effort could mean calling in someone who's off call just because that's the person the midwife, the client knows. So we just felt like a little confused again about making every effort. Like, how far are you expecting us to go with that? And it led us to a conversation about what does a known midwife mean? Because with the previous standard, it was like 1 of 4. Now is it like, okay, you know her name because you saw it on the wall in our office, like you know that this person may be at your birth, or does it have to be someone you've met in the hallway versus someone you've actually had a prenatal visit with? So the word known also becomes very open to interpretation, so we're wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Yeah, I guess a lot of our conversations was just around definition, because again, you know, what is continuity of care? What does that mean now? So we sort of had a conversation about what does continuity of care mean?
Great, thank you.
I'm Chava Glick from Kensington Midwives. We didn't get a chance to go through any concerns, but we like the language and the changes that were made. We think they support midwives working in alternative models, so we thought that was good, and then we ran out of time. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. So I think that's everybody, right, Sarah? Great. Ready to start.
So continuity of care, once you have a definition, please let us know. It doesn't exist. And again, continuity of care, and it could be continuity of carer, there's so many ways of looking at it and what it means. And again, this is that flexibility piece. Right now, our continuity of care standard is very prescriptive and may not be adaptable or to every situation. So that's, again, the piece where we trust midwives to define what it means. And a known midwife is the same idea. So again, depending on your circumstances, if you're a clinic of 2 midwives or a clinic of 17 midwives, it will mean different things. And we trust that each practice is going to have protocols in place to help, kind of negotiate all these definitions. But there isn't, like, the continuity of care document that we have right now is arbitrary. And it could be argued that it's actually not a true definition of continuity of care because there isn't really one. And so, again, this is the piece that's becoming more flexible and adaptable to the circumstances of each practice. So as far as a known midwife at your birth, and that's the thing, maybe the language of take reasonable steps isn't clear. Maybe it will be, again, a matter of massaging this a little bit so that it's not calling someone back from her holiday, but more about taking, trying to make every effort to have someone that's known at her birth. So that may be a language piece. But again, these standards are meant to be and expectations that will be discussed internally within each practice group. So the college is no longer going to tell you exactly you must have no more than 4 midwives. Currently, it says you must have a known midwife at your birth, and it's not always possible. I've been to births of someone I've never met before, and sometimes it happens. So so in that sense, I was falling below standards. So we want to avoid that, and we want to trust the midwives to adapt to each circumstances.
And some of the gaps have been filled in with an increased focus on the management and informational continuity. So that's another way that you may achieve an increased amount of continuity with your clients is by having that information in the way that you manage your practice and manage the care of your clients between midwives so that you can provide continuity in that context as well. And for many of you, it may still mean working in a group of no more than 4 midwives, and that's great. Like, this is, again, just to remind everybody, this is a minimum standard, and we know that midwives out there aren't achieving that one of those 4 are always at every birth. So we know that that's already happening. If that is your goal within your practice, to have 2 midwives or 4 midwives or whatever that is, you're still encouraged and welcome to to continue with that practice if that's what works in your community.
There were questions around breakdown of trust, so trust with clients or other care providers. So currently the college has a document that clearly details how one ends a relationship with a client, and that document will still exist. There will still be a system in place for ending a relationship with a client when that trust is gone and it's no longer beneficial for anyone to continue. So that doesn't change. And as far as a relationship with others, you're only accountable for your own behavior. So you could try the best possible to communicate well and collaborate. If it's not, if the person, physician or otherwise, is not responding, then it actually is not your problem. You've shown that you've shown due diligence, that you've done what you could to instill trust and communicate and collaborate. But you're only accountable for your own practice and your own behavior.
Super. Okay. Oh, sorry. We need it on a mic. Thanks. Question 37. Yeah.
Advocate.
On 37. Yeah.
Yes. So actually, I wrote that one down. Sorry, I missed it. Again, fits in with the reminder that these are standards at a minimum, and it's not an expectation that you would advocate for a client if that's not something that you can do given the context of what she or he is asking for you to advocate for, or in the context of your hospital environment, or because you're being pulled away to other labors. And we do not consider it a minimum standard that you would advocate in all circumstances on behalf of your client. Should you wish to, and should you feel that that's best practice or appropriate in the situation or in your client's best interest, then there's nothing in this document to prevent you from advocating on behalf of your client. We're just not holding you to that standard at minimum in all circumstances. It's also a very difficult thing to measure. Like, how does one advocate? To what degree would one need to advocate in all circumstances? So that's another. We were trying to keep these as very measurable standards as well.
So one follow-up question.
I'm worried about losing that one on a number of levels. And one is that I think if we look at nursing and medical standards, it's a basic shared standard of health professionals that health professionals do act as advocates for their clients, patients. So there's that. And advocacy goes in all sorts of ways. Like, I think sometimes we think of it simply as standing up in a fraught moment with someone with greater power than us, but it can have to do with hospital policy. I think advocating for our clients is at the center of what we do. And it runs through all sorts of elements of care. It can be about finding appropriate resources in the community. So I'm worried about losing that one. I think it is a minimal standard. I think we can apply a reasonable standard to it if midwives are in situations where the power imbalance is so great. I think our peers can totally assist us on that. But to remove that idea that you would advocate for evidence-based practice, for example, within your institutional setting, I think that's a real loss. So I would hope that we would keep that one.
Thanks for the feedback.
Sorry, Vicki, I just want to go back then to persons, because some of the aspects of advocacy is in the other principles. So it's the word in particular that you want to keep. Okay. So, thank you.
Great. So we've gone through the first three principles. If everyone could now take maybe can do 15 minutes to go through principles 4 and 5, integrity and commitment to self-regulation, and we'll come back here together and talk about that all together.
Feed my meter again.
Okay. Thank you.
Feed the machine.
You should download the app.
On you go. Okay. Hi, everyone. I think we're ready to get started again. So we've got Zara with the mic again, and we'll go through first principle number 4, integrity.
Hello, I'm Corinne at Kensington Midwives. So we liked, in terms of a benefit, that it recognized the sort of the stresses that can be impactful on midwives, and addresses the mental and physical health aspect of midwifery and how it might impact on client care, and so that's part of the standard. We were concerned, however, that it didn't sort of really address, there was a survey that went around bullying, and so we wonder if there could be something that might pull that piece of the picture out. So it's all very well to have this standard of, sleep relief or whatever we've established, but how do we address the potential that there may be stresses within the practice that impact on that, like bullying within a system, or in terms of interprofessional care? So just some nod to that. Is there anything else? Oh, we were we challenged a little bit by 41, the be honest and candid in all professional dealings. We believe in being honest and candid, but we were just thinking about times where we are less honest and candid, and thinking of situations like we've been up all night or we've done a lot of births, and to have to be compelled to tell someone how little sleep you've had or how much you're functioning on, and then have it as a standard that we should have disclosed that potentially seemed problematic to us.
Great. Thank you for that.
Hi, so we had a number of questions that we managed to find the answers for in the glossary at the back.
System works.
Which was very exciting. So we love 50 and 51. Yeah, and we had a discussion around, why the word mental was used, and it referred us back to the definition of the condition through the Ministry of Health. So we liked that it really addresses diagnosable conditions, and that 51 addresses the fatigue that's imposed by long working hours. On a personal level, I know we're all wanting to be less prescriptive, but on a personal level, I would love if an actual hour limit, like 24 hours, you have to stop working. But I know that's obviously not reasonable provincially. But definitely it's great that it's addressed in number 51, that we should not be working under fatigue conditions. So we talked about number 46 quite a bit. So it talks about recommending the uses of products and services based on evidence and clinical judgment. And we want to suggest changing it to and/or evidence and or clinical judgment. So the previous standard, number 3 on complementary and alternative medicine, we were wondering if number 46 had to do with some sort of replacement for the previous college standard on complementary and alternative medicine. Because midwives, while we may not be naturopaths or trained homeopathic doctors, we do have access to information and experience about complementary medicines. So we're just wondering kind of like what the new standard or thinking is on midwives' use of those other technologies. So yeah, changing that to and/or kind of opens the door for midwives to now recommend the use of products and services based on clinical judgment, even if it's not evidence-based.
Great. So
I think that's it.
Super, thank you.
So for the benefits, we really like the strength of the practice management responsibilities in this document, and just the overarching theme of integrity in all aspects. And our concerns were how to define what is right. And so in number, I didn't write the number down. Oh, right, in the preamble where it says, midwives willingly and consistently do what is right, maintaining the reputation and values of the profession. Yeah, yes. Yes, as opposed to least worst. Just that it could be very different for different people, different communities. One of the things with is VBAC at home, like some hospitals will tell women, midwives they'll lose their privileges. They do VBAC at home. So, what is right? It's IA, but we told we have to do EFM, that kind of thing.
Great, thank you very much.
Coming down the line.
Oh, okay, I can't even read my writing. So we liked it, generally speaking. It's kind of hard to argue with being integral and having integrity, so that was a good thing. We appreciate that you tried to define integrity, and that could be difficult. We had a little bit of it wasn't a split discussion, but there was definitely some people who were a little uncomfortable with maybe the words that are quite lofty around honesty and all those words that obviously we want to be honest and truthful, but it was a little bit like a Halo Madonna complex kind of thing. So just, maybe words like ethical would address it. Just a question, not a big concern. Really liked never abandon a woman, a client in labor. Very protective for the client, but for the midwife too. Very absolute language as opposed to some of the other absolute language that we thought shouldn't be so absolute. So that was a good one. And then the question just was 52. What does that really even mean? Like, how directive do you get with that in terms of somebody's responsibility to access health care for themselves? And that was it.
Thank you.
And that's honestly what happened. That's a candid, honest reply. We got sidetracked. Not that it's not important.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions from the webcast?
With respect to principle number 40, regarding not abandoning clients in labor, does this also apply to midwives routinely leaving clients whose care is transferred for hospital-indicated reasons? For example, midwives routinely leaving clients who have an epidural to go sleep. So a question with respect to that principle. Another comment or question with respect to number 44, the comment is that that principle might be unnecessary since it's covered by other provincial legislation. Sorry, which one was that? Principle number 44, regarding privacy and health information. And then principle number 53, two comments actually from the webcast, both speaking to the same thing. I appreciate the benefit of removing many of the lines that are struck out with respect to principle number 4, but wondering what was the thought behind eliminating number 53.
Thank you for that. All right.
Oh, it's covered by the
I think we're ready to go.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so I'll do my best to answer a few. I'm going to call on my professional colleagues here who know this much better than I do. So in terms of...
Sorry.
Did we miss a table?
Yeah, do we miss somebody? It seems like there's further questions. No?
No?
Okay, there you go.
In terms of never abandoning a client in labor, that question, it's exactly that, never abandoning a client in labor, full stop. It doesn't have to do with those situations where you would appropriately transfer care or that person is being cared for by someone else in your midwifery practice. You've lost trust and you've changed care providers. You've assisted them in finding someone else with whom they have trust, or their care is being covered by hospital staff because they have an epidural. It's about abandoning somebody in labor. And it's also protective of the midwives, because if you find yourself in a situation that you are outside of your scope, or someone has refused transfer to the hospital, even with your recommendation, that your college would expect you not to abandon that client in that situation. So hopefully that addresses that concern. Did I miss anything? No? Some of the other questions, So it's really hard to take notes when there's so many great comments. I look forward to watching this back later and taking a few more notes on some of the things that have been said. So number 44, taking reasonable precautions to protect the privacy and confidentiality. I think we tried to hit on a balance. And it's been through College Legal Counsel, this working group, some very incredible staff who have done a lot of great research into this. We tried to hit a balance between covering what is essential to your practice and not having too much repetition with things that were covered elsewhere. And it's interesting to answer that question in the context of the question about 53 as well, respect for diversity and equality, because that's something that we felt was covered in the Human Rights Code. It's also difficult to measure at a college level and easier to measure within the context of the legal Human Rights Code. So we eliminated that repetition, but we did keep the privacy thing just because of the importance of that to your particular practice. Sorry. I think there was an interesting comment sorry, excuse me, about being honest and candid, and in just how much disclosure, like full disclosure, that requires. So that's something interesting I think we need to take back and talk about, because I don't actually have an answer for that in terms of how much disclosure is required to be honest. Does somebody else have a comment on that one?
I'm just thinking what perhaps your OB colleagues would answer if they were told, have you had a busy night or whatever. They don't tend to comment too much.
But they don't always spend the entire time caring for the same person. So
No, but they...
Will you repeat that back for the...
Sure. I was just saying, I don't know what an OB colleague, if they've also been up, how they would respond to that, because, I mean, they might not be up multiple nights, but they could be up all night caring for many people and also not have sleep. And I don't have an answer for you, I don't think so either, and so I don't think that's the intent, is that you...
Sorry,
And the comment is, why are you practicing if you're exhausted? And there's actually a standard, if you carry on, that it says exactly this: you should not practice if you're exhausted, and it supersedes the disclosure. So you shouldn't be there if you are too tired to work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The effective use of healthcare resources available to 52. So this is looking at the system as a whole and how, Lily, do you want to maybe jump in here because you have a better understanding of this one?
Well, I think it was just I'm trying to remember because we had talked so much, but it was intended to consider the context that you're working in and be mindful of the system at large. I mean, some things are built into the system that we're duplicating care or causing extra steps and costing time and resources, but just being mindful of efficiencies, I think, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Around, but it's true, I mean, what does that mean? If you guys think of better ways to say any of these things, please, word for word, send them to us, because every time we read these, we see new things pop up.
Sorry, are you still speaking to 41?
No, sorry,
52.
The effective use of healthcare resources.
Sorry about that, I probably
52.
wasn't clear when I started.
Oh, okay, we have one question here from... Sorry, if we can just have you on the mic if you're going to make the point for the webcast. Sorry.
Sorry. So it's just on 52, I made that point. So, because the context in which I read it was, it fell after having a responsibility to not work if you have, keep yourself healthy. And then it talked about accessing health care. So it was like, does that mean I have to go to the doctor? Like, I mean, really, we just didn't get it, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I have to take the pill, whatever.
Yeah.
So what is
Right.
that
That's a good
mean?
point. No, it was intended in the context of the entire healthcare system. So using the resources that you have within your clinic, using appropriately what is available at the hospital, using the money that's allocated for various, supplies.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Point taken. Actually, somebody else has also raised that with me in terms of the placement of the order and how it could be understood. So thank you for bringing that one up as well.
That's interesting, because I thought it meant double dipping in the system. so that midwifery care that was duplicating what the obstetrician was doing.
Right.
And in fact, we've sometimes been accused of that.
Yeah, and it would include that as well, because that would be an inappropriate management of healthcare resources.
Sometimes.
And sometimes we get referral from obstetricians who realize that there's someone who has not only a complication during their pregnancy, but also is a complex individual because of social issues, and really believes that they would benefit from midwifery care, from the extra visits, from the extra time, from the education, from the breastfeeding support, and the, I guess you would call it management of community resources that we do. So a colleague, an obstetrician colleague, might consider that double dipping, where this particular obstetrician believes that there's a whole separate workload carved out that we are providing a service for.
Thank you. And so I think you have a couple other questions that you have to address still, and then is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Opportunity.
A really difficult one, define what is right. Our speakers touched on this morning, the least worst alternative. And I mean, it's ultimately, it comes down to your professional judgment on what is right and what's in the best interest of your clients. So I think that is a little bit purposely vague, and that there's not a prescriptive answer for every context in which you will be applying your professional judgment to tell you what right looks like in every case. But maybe one of you could speak to that, because I'm not a midwife.
No, but that's exactly it. That was the intent, to be able to adapt and to justify and tailor your practice to the need of your client. So right is exactly this, is what does your client need in the end, and what's best for him or her. There was a question about bullying as well.
Yeah.
And how the survey that went out recently, and really to want to, okay, and I think number 54 was intended to address part of that, but creating healthy work environment, and bullying ties into this. So it's not, again, prescriptive of how does one deal with bullying, but it does set a standard that the minimum expectation is that there will be a healthy work environment for all involved in a certain practice. So maybe it ties into the survey that's going around. And again, just as a reminder that all these standards are a minimum expectations of what each of us are expected to do. So it doesn't mean that you cannot have much more aspirational protocols that go well beyond what's expected here, but this is the bare bone expectations for all of us when we in our work.
Are we good there?
So? 46. Oh yeah, I wrote that down as a bit of a word thing. The recommend the use of products or services based on evidence and or clinical judgment.
For number 46?
The last part of the sentence. That's why it's there.
And not commercial gain, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's ultimately that you're doing what's in the best interest of your clients and not for your own personal gain. That's the main intent of that particular standard.
But it does make sense what you mentioned about putting the /or, because then it doesn't have to have evidence behind it for you to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you just say that though? Not recommend products for commercial gain.
So, want to repeat that back?
Yeah, maybe. Oh, the suggestion was, couldn't we just say, do not recommend products for commercial gain? And that's a great suggestion. So.
Yeah, and all the suggestions that are written on the pages, each colored piece of paper, we're going to collect those at the end, and we will go through those again in detail, as well as inviting folks to send emails, comment on the website, and use the feedback form that we provided in the packages here today. So consultation's open till the 21st, right? So I think we should get moving on to Principle 5, just so that we can all get out of here at a reasonable hour. And so don't know who's going to start with that. Sarah?
I'll start right here.
Super.
Hi, Claudette Leduc, and I work in the East End of Toronto. So for standard number 5, we really appreciated how explicit it was in what's expected of us. In the preamble, there There was some great discussion at the table around the wording, and maybe some historical difficulty with the specific language. There was a suggestion of crossing out everything between self-regulation and based on the premise. The specific people who had the discussion can probably speak in more detail to the reasoning, but they were here when the college was put together, so I defer. And so the question that came out of it was, why was that wording put there? It feels maybe like it was a bit of an educational piece for the membership. And was that the case? And the last thing is number 62. About supervising. There was a comment made about, is it really the practice or the abilities that we are assessing? Is that the right language?
Thank you, Claudette.
When we discussed we went to a place of discussing just self-regulation, so we didn't address the exact points here, but just thinking more about this process right now and starting to feel like on getting to the last principle and feeling that we're having many more questions than answered today from this process, and having some concern that it seems like what might be the process now is this feedback right now will go back to the college, and then we will get a final draft, and that will be the final draft. And feeling like if this was a paper going into your supervisor, this would not be near the end of the process, considering all the questions and all the edits and all the, so we had quite a lengthy conversation about that, and wondering what would have made us feel better. Like I think the regulation or the standards that are being rescinded felt like a safety net, and we've been using them to have context for our practice. And so those are being taken away, and this is being replaced. But there seems to be a lot of question of, is this trying to replace this, and are they saying this because of this? And is this supposed to address this hole that I'm feeling now, that I'm not going to have this particular standard? And maybe it would be easier to understand if we looked at the standards that are being rescinded and understood it from that side. I'm just telling you what we discussed. I'm not saying that we have to necessarily redo this, but
there is a document that actually does exactly that. Some of it is abbreviated there.
For continuity of care, for three of them.
No, there's actually an more extensive one.
Okay.
That does go through, and if you haven't had a chance to read it all today.
Okay, I missed that appendix. I read this.
It's appendix
because trust me, when this first started, we were all like,
Be like Bob.
Okay, I don't want to take up too much time, but it is feeling like a fast turnaround, and it is feeling like this is our last chance to make contributions to this process, and it feels like a big deal. Like it feels like it's a big project to get rid of 25 and then coming down to 5 principles. Mm-hmm. And that's what we were discussing and feeling uncomfortable about.
Thanks for that feedback.
Okay, sure. All good from this
say
table.
That too. Yeah. Okay. I think we do have someone on the webcast. Am I right there?
This is a comment just with respect to Principle 5 in general. The comment is that Principle 5 is, like the documentation section, quite prescriptive compared to the rest of the standards.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we've got one table left that hasn't had a chance to give feedback.
Okay. The benefits were that it engages us with our regulatory body. Our concerns are that we still have hoops to jump through. And our questions are basically like big question, understanding this change in the context of the changes that are forthcoming from the CMO, i.e. the registration standard, QA, CTCS, when and how, like how does this all intersect with each other? And we're assuming these principles are overarching, but is that true?
Great. Thank you for those questions.
Okay, so the question about number 62 was, it might be about wording. Appropriately supervise students and peers with whom you have a duty to supervise and provide honest and objective assessments of their practice. And I think the question was, is it really the practice we're assessing or their abilities? Maybe that question, is that confusing perhaps around the practice group, but certainly it would be their abilities. So that's a piece that we can talk about when we're looking at the rest of the language questions. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, why don't, do you want to repeat that back? Just
Sorry.
It's not their ability that can be measurable.
Okay.
We don't know what's in their head. We don't know what they could have done last week. All we can do is measure their behavior. And that would be performance or practice. But practice is a word that's been used in 4 different ways in this document. So practice meaning organization. I wish we could use that word for the organization, the group of people that you're managing. And performance or behavior could be used here instead of clinical practice.
And again, can you just say where you're from for your perspective?
I'm Carlene Wilson Mitchell, and I teach at Ryerson University, and I work here and there.
Yeah, I just think that's important in the context of your comment. Thank you.
Thank you. With regard to the consultation process and this feeling like it's, where is this input going to, when's the next opportunity to, that you're going to get a final draft and not have any more say in it? Is that what you're getting at? I don't know if someone else can address the process a little better, but certainly this is open until the 21st of December, and then we're going to spend lots of time reworking it with all the feedback in mind. And the idea was to present it to council in March for approval. So, yeah, I'm not aware that there is really another opportunity to look at a draft. But we can definitely talk about that and hear that. I mean, it feels like we were hopeful that having this consultation in person sort of in the middle of the 2 consultation periods would help address that, but we'll take that very seriously. What other questions?
Sorry,
Go
yes,
ahead.
I was going to say how this ties into everything else that the college is working on. I'm actually going to tap Kelly to come perhaps and speak to that, or Tiffany, because there's many exciting things coming that we're looking forward to. Very briefly.
Are those all the questions, though?
I think so.
I could do that now, and then have we answered all the questions?
I think on this one.
Yeah, there weren't very many. Yeah, okay. Before
so.
Kelly responds, you'd like to ask another question?
The safety net.
Okay.
The only thing is the safety net comment.
Good timing.
But I don't know what to
It ties into the last question of, is this the last draft? My question is, how significant amount of changes do we need before we are required to send it back out, or is there no more requirement? I can't remember.
Okay, well, that's a good question. So there is no legal requirement to go out to members to consult on standards at all. It's best practice, it's what we do, and it's a part of our process. So there is a legal requirement to do so for regulations, and so we have a 60-day minimum requirement of circulating those documents. We also have that same legal requirement to go out with our bylaws for a minimum of a 60-day consultation period. So what we're doing is
is best practice. So I can't say that we don't have to do anything more, but what's the right thing? The right thing is we started this consultation process throughout the summer. We heard from several people, several individuals and practices. We knew that we needed another consultation period. We are here today, but we're also strongly encouraging everyone on the webcast, and also when you go back to your practice partners and your practices, please have discussions. We will consider every single piece of feedback that we get, and we do. These guys reviewed everything and made decisions on everything, and we will provide a response to your feedback, just like we did with the first consultation. So if we don't make changes, we will explain why, and if we do make changes, we will explain why where it's necessary. These guys really get to choose what the next steps are. They're part of the council, or the council gets to choose. If the council feels that we haven't done a good enough job in considering everyone's feedback, then they have to make a decision to change course. But if they feel that we have heard from as many people as possible and we've effectively answered those questions and effectively, made good changes, then it's really up to them to decide what they're going to do and how they're going to move through. So this isn't, we're not railroading this. Really, they get to choose and debate what the best process is. Carol. And
if you can just a brief comment around that. Thank you. First of all, thank you for all the work that you've done. Thank you. I know it must have taken a long time and you put a lot of effort in. And I think that just for other people in the room that maybe haven't led huge scale changes, just a little thing. This is a very natural process of discomfort in big change. The people who lead the change have been working on it for a really long time, and for them, it's really crystal clear. The people who are getting affected by the change are like, what? And that's just okay. Yeah. That's just an uncomfortable space that we are just living in right now. It's part of it. They've already moved on to the next step, and we are just catching up with the first step. So I think just everybody just take a deep breath, give it some time, let it sink in. It's okay to be uncomfortable. And I think when you're getting some of the feedback about stuff that you've worked on, and you might feel a bit like, but it's just kind of where we're at, right? And we get, I think, where you're at too. So, it's just amazing that we are even doing this now, and whatever, I could wax on, but good.
Thank you. I did want to also say, and to Kay's point, that there have been, you can go and look at all of the standards that currently exist today, read them, and say, well, what is meaningful in this standard? What can't I let go of, and where do I find it in the new standard? And that's a really great exercise to do. It's one that we've all done here, and so it would be smart to do it yourselves so that you can determine whether or not, oh, maybe I can live without this standard, and maybe this one actually does articulate it better, and I'm happy with that. Or not, and point it out to us, and we'll fix that. Yes.
It's Vicki Van Wagner. This morning, Zubin, Austin?
Yes.
Zubin said something that, he said many things that were important, but one that really struck me about a college, a regulatory body, having a unique opportunity to steer the profession. Mm-hmm. And I guess the big question that came for me is, where are you steering us to in terms of what your agenda has been in this? And is that a question maybe that we all need to ask ourselves? Where do we want you to steer us? And I think part of this has felt a little bit like you're letting go of steering. There was a lot of steering built into, yes. And possibly too much, possibly we've evolved away from needing it. But I think this question of steering is an important one for perhaps you to ask us, for us to ask you. Mm-hmm. But I think the point is well taken that the opportunity to steer is there, and we should be conscious about what that is.
Yeah, and I think that we as a college, and the council especially, is looking to,
I would say not steer the profession in one direction, but to also is really their goal right now is to remove unnecessary barriers to permit the profession to define itself. And so really, I think these minimum standards are really the direction that we're setting, saying bare minimum, this is where the college expects you to be. And then you guys get to define what's really important to you. You can go out and define and what's best practice and what's more aspirational in terms of midwifery and how you want to identify the profession and for everyone. So I think I'm looking at Deanna's presentation from this morning about what is our role here. And I think our college is being very clear, or learning to be much clearer about what is actually our role in the entire profession. And our role is to be regulators, to do that well, and to stay in our box as much as possible, and let the profession make decisions about directions where they should. So I think that we're just really trying to play in our sandbox in that way and do a really good job and still enable the profession to define itself. But at a minimum, you got to meet these standards. So the other question that was raised about what else are we doing? Do I have a second to address that? Yeah, sorry, I can't remember who asked that question now, but what else are we doing at the college? Sorry, Marina? Oh, that's not the question? You think it's the question, but I'm seeing Tracy say no.
So at our table, what we were saying was, we understand that there's the 5 principles.
Yes. Sorry, we'll repeat that, please.
Hi, it's Tracy Pierce-Kelly from Burlington and Area Midwives. What we were talking about at our table was the 5 principles and how they are overarching. And when we look at the schematic that you showed around the act, the regulation, our community guidelines and the AOM, clinical practice guidelines, the SOGC, that kind of stuff over to the right. And then there's 3 boxes. And the box we're currently looking at is college standards and guidelines.
Yes.
Are we going to be looking at indications, consultations, transfer of care next? Or are we going to be looking at our quality assurance requirements? Or is the college going to put an emphasis on registration and changes? So we're making changes, but it's kind of like when we clean our house. You want to start making a change here, but it impacts everything else.
It sure does.
So how do we feel comfortable with this change if we don't know what else is coming next?
Okay, so I can tell you.
Or if it's a good decision.
Yep, so I can tell you based on so what's coming next in terms of our strategic plan. We're almost coming up at the final year 1 of our 3-year strategic plan, and you can read all about it on our website if you'd like. And it's been in our annual report. We tried to make it less dry than last time. But we are what we're calling modernizing legislation and regulation to the best of our abilities. So we already have submitted our revised general regulation, or which we would like to be calling it the quality assurance regulation. We've already submitted a revised professional conduct regulation. So you were consulted on that last year, and they were submitted this year. It's a long process because the government actually owns that process and will decide to move it through or not when they choose to. We're currently working on, as Tiffany mentioned earlier, we're currently working on the laboratory regulation. Council just passed the laboratory, proposed changes to the laboratory regulation, so that will be going out to you guys for a 60-day consultation very shortly, within probably the next couple of weeks. And then you'll be able to comment on that. That's a regulation that falls under the Laboratory and Specimen Collection Center Licensing Act. We also have our drug regulation that we're working on right now, and those changes are coming to council in December. The minister has asked us to look at prescribing controlled substances for midwives, but we're also looking at broadening the prescribing authority for midwives in addition to controlled substances. So you'll be seeing that shortly coming to council, and then also a consultation on that. There are some changes that are currently out, consultations on the Controlled Acts regulation right now that clearly specify that midwives would have the ability to apply ultrasound. So that's out for consultation right now. It's not our consultation, it's the ministry's. So a lot of things on that level are actually happening, and we expect, well, we will be completed, our processes will be complete by the end of our 3 years. So we're expecting probably most of these regulations to be at least completed our role by the summer of 2018. We're also working on the registration regulation, and that is a very long process, but that's a very important one to us. It's very, it affects not only registrants coming into the profession, but also all of you upon renewal. So we are being very careful and doing our due diligence on making sure we make good decisions about that one before coming to you. So those are the biggest documents that we're working on. Then when we take a step down, other standards will be reviewed. We are going to be revising the second birth attendant standard just because it needs to change, and we'll be focusing on more what are the competencies, I believe, that's sort of the goal of that one. We are going to make some revisions to what's when a client chooses care outside of standards, just about terminating the relationship, but also providing care even when that happens. So we'll be making those clear, but those will remain. In terms of the one that I think is the big one is the CTCS, so the Consultation Transfer of Care document. If you look at everything that we're doing, it makes a lot of sense for us to rescind that as well. It's not on our plan today to do so. We're sort of, as Carol was mentioning, change is hard, and we need to take steps to get there. But I do see that in the future, we are going to have that conversation about whether or not the CTCS is the right document for midwifery in Ontario, or are there different kinds of documents that could exist that could support and guide, as opposed to be written in minimum standard language. So it's not on today's agenda, but it's definitely somewhere in the future. But we've got a lot on our plate right now, and we're going to try to do all of this really well, and we want to do that really well too. So right now, it's not happening in the very near future. So that's it, I think. Okay, so then I'm going to just say a few closing words. I wanted to thank everyone, obviously, for coming here today and participating on the webcast. I do feel like we had a good amount of conversation, but we do want to hear from you individually, from your practice groups. We want to hear, we heard a lot of things today, but we know we didn't hear everything. So there are several ways to provide feedback. You can fill out the sheets here. You can go onto our consultation page on our website. You can send individual emails. So please, 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 if you have more to say, we want to hear from you. And you can see these guys really will take into consideration all of your feedback, and we'll make the best document that we can. Just to remind you, it's December 21st is when we intend to close this consultation, so you still have quite a bit of time to do so. And we won't be going to council until March, so we're giving ourselves quite a bit of time to review that feedback, really consider it, and provide a response to you as well. And we will keep you up to date on our progress all along, so we'll let you know where we're at in the process, and so hopefully you can, it won't come as a shock if we do provide the document to council in March, or it won't come as a shock if we decide to delay it for any reason. And before I hand it over to Tiffany for her final words, I want to say a special thank you to, they're going to hate me, but Joanna Gerasi, who's our Quality Assurance Manager and Practice Advisor, and Marina Salokian, who's our Policy Director and Quality Assurance Policy Director.
They've worked very closely with this working group over the months, and they've really expertly guided them in their decision making, and really have provided them with a tremendous amount of research and information and context for them to be able to make their good decisions. So thank you for that. And I also want to say a special thank you to Victoria Marshall, who's, as you've heard her expertly deal with our consultation here today. She is our communications and events coordinator, and I thank you for orchestrating this event and having it run so smoothly. And also wanted to thank everybody else on staff. Really, you've made today just run so smoothly, and I have to say it's an honor to work with every single one of you. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Kelly, for your closing comments, and we want to thank you for your leadership and direction, our CEO and Registrar of the College of Midwives. I wanted to also acknowledge and thank Carol's comments, about change, and it can be scary as a council member. But remember, though, change is good. And just a bit of a personal aside for anybody who knows me in the room, they know that when I'm not doing college work or head midwifery work at Markham Stouffville or catching babies, I'm usually somewhere where the temperature is greater than 28 degrees. However, I was asked to climb Mount Everest, and I have chosen to take it on. So change is so good. Who knows what you can achieve when you put your mind to it? Just pretending I'm going to be somewhere really hot. You can do it. We can do it. And really great, amazing things will come out of it. But I do want to acknowledge, as scary as Mount Everest sounds, that when one is going about change, that it is scary. So thank you for that. We also want to thank our special guest speakers today, Deanna Williams and Zubin Austin, for their thought-provoking presentations and setting the stage for this afternoon's dialogue on our standards. And I'd like to express my gratitude to the Professional Standards Working Group. So Isabel, Jennifer, Wendy, and Lily, thank you so much for your tremendous hard work that's gone into getting us to this point. And of course, the ongoing work that's to be done before we get to June 2018 when the standards come into force. So thank you to everyone who has come in today, who are present in person, and to those who have attended this presentation via the webcast or live stream. We do really appreciate your feedback and look forward to the many opportunities that you will have to get us that feedback over the next couple of months. So thank you very much.